Hello, I'm Deborah Malone, founder of The Internationalist and host of Internationalist Marketing TV. Today's guest is Khalid El Khatib, CMO of Consumer Reports. Khalid, what a pleasure to finally be spending some time with you and talking about a subject which I'm sure you're absolutely fascinated about, and that's Consumer Reports. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, no, a pleasure, a pleasure. Well, let's start at maybe a starting point that not everyone is that familiar with. Most people know that Consumer Reports provides unbiased reviews, ratings, buying advice on various products and services, but they may not realize that it is an 88-year-old nonprofit organization. So I'm curious right off the bat. Is this nonprofit status a boon to your efforts, a challenge, or maybe both?
I think it's more of an opportunity than it is a challenge, but those two things are certainly concentric circles. I think that it helps us across a couple of dimensions. First and foremost, because we're a nonprofit, we are wholly unbiased and independent. So if you think about the product review space more broadly, we differ from a lot of our competitors, quote unquote, although they're not direct competitors, in that we buy everything that we test and we don't take any advertising. A lot of people don't know that, but I think it is what sort of led us to where we are today. I think it's actually 89 years now. Someone corrected me last week. 89 years since our founding. The second dimension here is that, again, when you think about our quote unquote competitors in the product review space, I say like lots of people tell you what to buy and what not to buy, some more successfully than others. I happen to believe that the research and rigor with which we do our reviews is second to none. That said, everyone effectively stops there, but we keep going. And what I mean by that is if one of our tests shows that a product does not live up to expectations, its marketing messages, or at worst, it's unsafe, then we push the manufacturer to make changes. And if they don't, then we work with or we activate our massive membership and push for legislative or federal changes. And we've seen that come true with everything from seat belts and secondhand smoke decades ago to backup cameras in cars more recently to a whole slew of food safety issues, including a recent investigation that we did into infant formula, which the federal government is a very fast follow, announced that they were looking into.
That actually almost shows an advocacy side to what you're doing. It's not only that you're making the claims, you believe in them to the point that you will take the next step, and that's pretty remarkable. And it sounds like the kind of successes that you've had are just extraordinary. And I can see how that the nonprofit status keeps you wholly independent. So are there any challenges associated with it? I know you started with an opportunity and a challenge, or sometimes part of the, flip side of each other, but I guess other than fundraising, huh?
Or yeah, look, I think there are a couple of challenges. First and foremost, as a marketer, as the chief marketing officer, it's a more complex story than just we do ratings and reviews or we're just a nonprofit with a singular mission. I mean, what we do is effectively sit on the side of the consumer and in hopes of enacting marketplace change. And that alone is a mouthful, but when you consider how it plays into cars, things in the home, babies, food safety, sustainability, etc. We don't have a singular persona. I mean, we effectively work on behalf of all consumers, all Americans. We don't have a singular issue. One day it can be cars, then next it can be air conditioners, and then it can be infant formula. And so that's sort of an embarrassment of riches, but it can be a challenge when you have finite resources, finite share of attention, etc. I think the other is being an unbiased, especially in this day and age, does not come easy. We like I said, don't take advertising. We buy everything that we test, but being firmly on the side of the consumer means that you oftentimes make manufacturers unhappy, you make government officials unhappy, and even consumers will accuse us of bias if they feel like an issue which has been politicized, especially in recent times is sits firmly on one side of the aisle or the other. And again, we try to let the consumer be our North Star. We definitely lean into the expertise of our scientists, our researchers, and our experts, but it's certainly not easy.
No, you bring up such amazing points, particularly since, we're in the amidst of so much time of uncertainty and polarization and so on. But I think the richness of what you talk about actually it adds to your story so much, particularly when you are that when you say quite rightly that the consumer is your North Star, and sometimes that's not even easy. But let me ask you something else, because this is something that a lot of CMOs now have to grapple with, particularly with legacy brands. How do you embrace that organization's legacy while also creating maybe contemporary appeal, not only to a new generation, but maybe even to what people knew or thought of Consumer Reports to be?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it goes back to your earlier question, which is I see our legacy as much more of an opportunity than a challenge. We're fortunate to have tremendously high brand recognition and affinity, especially in the sort of 55 plus demographic. And so we have folks in their 60s, 70s in particular who have been members of Consumer Reports for 50 years, who have not bought a car or a home appliance without consulting us. And what we try to do is tap into that awareness and that affinity in order to welcome the next generation of members. And so we have a lot of great content around baby, around used cars, for example, is a good example of where we've evolved in order to help bring in the next generation. And what we're trying to do is lean more heavily into both nostalgia and intergenerational marketing in order to bring new members into the fold, while at the same time signaling to everyone that Consumer Reports has evolved tremendously over those last 89 years. And so, on our very first magazine cover, we reviewed milk cartons, and some of the manipulative marketing practices around the grades of the milk versus the quality of the milk, and finding that it was really just so they could charge, so the sort of dairy lobby could charge more for milk that it was of equal quality. And what does that look like today? I mean, it looks like supplements. So we have a big issue on supplements, which are not regulated, which have, their share of dubious claims. And like I said, it looks like systemic change. So in the 60s or 70s, it was the seat belt. Now it's the backup camera. It's technology that alerts you when your car is overheating and you may have a pet or at worst, a loved one in it. And so, we have to sort of continue to invest there. And there are all sorts of opportunities to do it. Security and privacy is another great one. So, telemarketers, crypto scams, all of that sort of all those issues that are happening now is another opportunity for an organization like Consumer Reports to advocate on behalf of consumers. And it's incumbent on folks like me to sort of tell that story and say, hey, we're not just reviewing station wagons or refrigerators anymore. We've actually evolved and we're holding all sorts of industries accountable, and we're making your labs better in myriad ways.
Now, how do you find which of the newer areas to look at? Is it just sign of social listening and know that there's just tremendous problems with, for example, some, phone scams or whatever it might be?
Yeah, I think it's we have a very sophisticated team that looks at all sorts of signals. So some of it is consumer purchasing power and patterns. So like a lot of people are buying this thing. Sometimes we'll get ideas from the actual members of the community and our membership. So we do have like a multi-million strong membership, and they can be fairly vocal. If a product is not working or they see like an issue that's really unsafe or they're reading about. So social listening plays into it. But a great example is our impact team met with several members of the Black community, including many Black women, and they had heard through those conversations that folks were getting sick from synthetic hair braiding products. And that was a product that was not regulated by the FDA or any other government agency. And so it was something that we took the initiative to test in partnership with many other academics in the space. And what we found was dangerously high levels of chemicals like acetone in synthetic hair braids. And so we launched an investigation. We socialized our findings to members of the influencer community, the academic community, and the press. And that's a great example of where that sort of initiative came to us from actual community interactions and to put it succinctly, the TikTok alone launch announcing the findings of that investigation got something like 6 million views in just a matter of days.
Yeah, and so in the evolution in the 89 years, now that I'm getting the age correct as well, in the 89 years, it certainly shows that there's certainly new ways to use media to get some of those messages out as well. And that it's extraordinary. Though that's a great story. That's a great story because it may be a product that may not have been on the radar, unless somebody necessarily brought it up. Let me just ask you something else. And I have heard you speak before. But you often say stability can be a superpower in volatile times, as can agility. So tell us more about what that means to you and of course to Consumer Reports. And do you have any advice for other marketers or people in a role like yours?
Yeah, I think about it twofold. I think stability first and foremost. I mean, we live in a very frenetic era. Things happen very quickly. The world is super polarized. And we have seen the erosion of trust in our institutions, whether it's the government or traditional media, for a number of reasons, right? And I think that creates an opening for institutions like Consumer Reports that are wholly nonpartisan, that are advocating on behalf of the consumer and not on corporations. And at the end of the day, we know through our own market research, but also market research that is widely accessible to any marketer, that people care about themselves and they care about their families. They care about pocket issues. They care about safety. They care about putting a roof over their heads. And so when I talk about stability, it's like, okay, what is a core message that we can go out with or a campaign that really, reaches people through their hearts and minds in order to surface to them that we are advocating on behalf of them. And this is an issue that's sort of core to who you are and not super aspirational or over intellectualized. I think that's what I really mean when I talk about stability. And then in terms of agility, I think twofold. One, the world is moving very quickly, like I just said. Sometimes it's good, a lot of times it can feel really bad, and we see that reflected in things like donation trends relative to certain issues. We see that reflected in traffic patterns. We see that reflected in how we engage with acquisition partners, whether it's Instagram or Facebook or Google keyword campaigns. And so you have to have a culture of agility inside the company so that you can turn up channel differentiation when necessary to do so. If you see a story that's really taking off on TikTok, for example, you can employ all of the various spokes of your marketing machine in order to get that story out there and reach other people. Sending an email, for example, when there's a natural disaster, if you have authority in that space. And I think that you have to be you have to be super agile. You have to have people on the team who recognize that their job description as written is not how it will stay for certainly not a year, but probably not even for 6 months. Things evolve, responsibilities evolve very quickly. And you have to have people who are empowered to surface new ideas, new ways of doing things. And at the end of the day, what I always say to my team is like, we're trying to get to 85% here. Like we want to get as much good stuff done as possible. It's not going to be possible to hit perfect, and it's not going to be possible to get everything done either. And so that's what I try to instill in the folks who work on the marketing team here at CR.
Yeah, it's like 10 B pluses are better than that one A plus,
That's right.
just keep it going. Well, you start to talk a little bit just about some advertising in some ways. You were talking about different ways that you might populate social media and so on. I'm just curious, how do you balance that brand building with kind of the immediacy of member acquisition and fundraising? That's always a tough one, the performance marketing versus the longer term brand building. I mean, I realize that one can inform the other. But that's got to be tough when you were raising your own funds without advertising or anything else.
Really hard. It's hard everywhere. I spent the last 10 years working in tech, and so much of a CMO's job is to advocate for an investment in brand, which I believe, and I think most good CMOs believe is foundational to the work that you do, and it can make that performance spend much more effective and efficient. I think, I'm fortunate to have a strong leadership team and a supportive board who believe that investing in the CR brand is important, and why it's especially important for an institution like ours, and I think a lot of nonprofits are in this space as well, is that, like I said, we have tremendously high awareness and affinity for that 55 plus demographic, but it's much weaker in the 35 to 55. And so, that population of folks will eventually go away. And unless we make a foundational investment in marketing to younger and more middle-aged folks, we're going to be in dire straits in a decade or so. And so that's why we try to invest. An investment in brand, it does, it looks a lot different in 2025 than it looked 15 years ago when I was working at WPP. Like, we're not spending $3 million on a TV commercial and then taking out an ad on Sunday Night Football for another 10 million. It can look like an influencer engagement program, whereby you're getting folks that have authority in a specific space to spread your message. It can look like a sophisticated email strategy, where, the expectation is not that these people convert into membership or donate, but you build muscle memory around the fact that you are sort of operating in the same new media space as some of these really prolific and interesting substackers. And then it can, of course, look like a sophisticated connected TV campaign, whereby we know that the folks that are watching, I'm going to butcher this because I'm not a huge TV watcher, but the people who are watching TLC are more likely to have children than someone watching HGTV who's more likely to cook. And so we have a bunch of different creative assets that we can serve in a very sophisticated and dynamic way to build awareness on CTV in a way that you couldn't do on linear even like 3 years ago.
Yeah, and I've seen some of your work, and the multi-generational aspects I thought were quite clever. And I'm guessing that's one of the ways that you bring people in. You've mentioned nostalgia. I know you've also talked about positivity and how trusted information can make a big difference in marketing now. And those are all things that are just so foundational to what CR is all about. Um, is that is that true for all brands? Or how do these elements, really wind up influencing your attitude toward your own marketing efforts?
I think it's exceptionally true for Consumer Reports. I mean, one of the catalysts for this campaign that we have, whereby a bunch of dads have sort of bringing their kids or grandkids into the fold of CR, is I try to center some of the marketing work that I do on my own experience. Like, I'm a focus group of one, but I spend a lot of time talking about Consumer Reports. And what I hear almost universally, regardless of who I'm talking to or where, is like, oh, my dad loves Consumer Reports, or my dad has been a subscriber for 40 years. And so we turn that into a commercial whereby someone is buying a car and they call their dad for advice, and he has all of his magazines sprawled out in front of him. Where someone is gotten a couple of car seats when they're expecting, and their dad uses their car seat finder online to sort of hand it off to their kid to make a smarter decision. So, I think we're exceptional in the sense that there are not a lot of brands where someone would say, oh, my dad loves X, Y, or Z. But what I will say is that, again, in this hyper polarized and sometimes toxic environment in which we now live, I think the commercials that really break through and resonate are those that are positive and make you feel good. And then we are seeing, whether it's big brands like Unilever and others or small D2C brands, nostalgia definitely has a stronghold, especially in capturing the sort of attention of Gen Z and millennial folks. It's a trend that doesn't seem to be going away.
Yeah, and it's a surprising one, to be quite frank. But it seems to work well for you. So let me ask you something. How would you want people to perceive Consumer Reports in 2025 and beyond? Would the perception be the same for all generations? I mean, or do you have to get that really important 55 plus group to think differently about your offering now, or that's got to be a fascinating part of your role.
Yeah, it is. Look, I think at the end of the day, there's something about life stages in which I think Consumer Reports works best for someone who's like 35 or 40 plus. I think, you have more, presumably more disposable income than you once had. You're maybe more likely to be or considering becoming a homeowner or a car owner. You're either considering having children or you know people who have children. And CR really works well for folks in that boat, as opposed to someone, someone in their 20s who's going to look at a bunch of reviews on Reddit or word of mouth, and if it doesn't work, they'll maybe throw it away or move on to the next one. And so I think that what we want people to take away in that sort of 35 to 55 range is that Consumer Reports provides a tremendous amount of utility. When I started here, I had been using mostly our competitors to purchase things like air purifiers, air fryers, mattresses, etc. And after I started and started to understand the research and rigor with which we conducted all of our tests, I changed out all my products, and everything that I have now works much better. So there's tremendous utility in that we have things like Bill Negotiator that helps negotiate bills on your behalf, including my home internet bill, which was a big savings. And so, yes, utility, but marketplace change also. And it's rare to find a product or a nonprofit where you actually gain utility that supports that marketplace change. I want people to know that. And then the sort of 55 plus folks, the people who have been with us for a long time, if they're in a position to give more, I mean, what we're seeing is a lot of folks who are retired, who tend to be very active, who have been reading the magazine for decades, are starting to give more donations, more major gifts, etc. And that's because they bought their first car, their first car seat, or their first stroller with Consumer Reports. They read a report on salmonella, for example, and how they could clean the kitchen when preparing chicken. And they want to ensure that there was an unbiased advocate for consumers who's still doing this work in 10 years, especially when the government is so full of unknowns.
No, you make a great point. You also mentioned that you do come from the tech world, and I'm curious if how that might have informed how you take this role, and also maybe what made you take this role after that tech experience.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I spent the last almost 10 years in tech, including most recently at a software company. And I think the thing that appealed to me about this job is that it's such an iconic legacy brand and such a strong American institution. And to sort of get the keys to a brand that's that powerful was really appealing. And candidly, after 10 years of marketing software that was fairly complex to explain and to market, it was like, this story makes a lot of sense. This is a great position for a marketer to be in because, sure, there are some challenges around the complexity of our mission and all of the different stories that we're trying to tell all the time. But at the end of the day, I'd rather that than, have to do a bunch of analyst conversations and market ROI and everything like that. So that was really compelling to me. And sorry, I can't remember the second part of the question.
Oh no, I'm really curious as to well, sure. I mean, I'm sure you brought certain skills from that world. But uh, what's the greatest satisfaction you get? I think that you're just expressing it. I mean, you're
Yeah.
expressing it
Yeah.
so beautifully because you really you understand the investment of time and research and the utility it provides and the advocacy it provides. I mean, that's got to be a really deep-seated level of satisfaction from what you're trying to communicate in a marketing role.
Yeah, I think I'm fortunate in that the role checks a lot of boxes, and I think about it threefold. Like one, at my last company, I had a fairly large P&L and you know managed a bunch of numbers, and so it was satisfying to see me and my team move the needle on some of those numbers. And at CR, because of the size of the organization and the reach, it's a big P&L as well. And so as I, consider myself to be a strong operator and to have the opportunity to continue to work with healthy budgets and look at financial reports day in, day out on a monthly, quarterly basis is satisfying. And when you have a really good day, you have a really good day. It feels good. The two components in this role that I certainly did not have in tech were really coalesced around impact. And I think about that twofold. One, again, this is like such an iconic company, and I feel such a responsibility to do right by it. My father moved to America in his late 20s, early 30s from the Middle East. And he and his brothers, I was having dinner with them when I first took the job, said, "It's amazing you work here." We actually learned and perfected our English by reading Consumer Reports magazine because it was so straightforward and it provided so much great advice on how to live a happy, healthy life in America for someone who didn't really know what was going on. And that's such a like an interesting microcosm for what we do every day and have done for decades. And then the second piece of it, I was telling you earlier, I live in Cobble Hill in Brooklyn, which is like baby central. And so all of my friends who live around me have children, and my sister who lives 3 blocks away has a small child as well. And my other sister in Chicago has two. And they're the sort of biggest fans, biggest advocates, and sometimes critics of reports and research that we put out, where they say like, "Did you see this?" or like, "What's the real story here?" or "We need to buy a new car seat. Which one should we get?" And the conversations that I have through that lens and many others just make me feel really good and reinforce that I'm adding value to people's lives.
Yeah, it's personal. I mean, it's personal on every level. I mean,
For sure.
that's what's really wonderful about it. Well, I could talk to you all day, and I just love your stories. I just love the personal ones because I think it's an experience for so many people. It's just remarkable that your family, read Consumer Reports. I've heard stories of other families, learning English through Reader's Digest. I've heard report other people tell stories that their mother learned English through watching soap operas. You know what I mean? And it's just this wonderful, wonderful experience. So what's next? What's next for you in Consumer Reports?
Yeah, it's a great
Yeah, I
question.
mean, I must say you have accomplished a lot in a very short time. I mean, the grasp that you have and the passion that you have for it is just remarkable. But I'd love to hear what you think is next. Even with some agility in that it might not be exactly what's next.
Sure. Yeah, I think a few things. So first of all, we're continuing to invest in the brand. So hopefully in very short order, you'll see some great stories, including more of these intergenerational moments out in the field. The others, we're investing tremendously in the mobile app. I mean, we are seeing like mobile traffic really increase. We're seeing consumer behavior drive to mobile. Yeah, I think, even if you are shopping in a store now, you're sort of double checking everything that you're seeing against reviews that you're reading online. And so look for us to relaunch our mobile app and for that to be augmented with what we call Ask CR, which is an AI chatbot that's been trained only on our data. So on our 88 years of testing data and expert insights, which is, I'm bullish on AI for sure, but it has a whole lot of flaws. And so that's a big push that we're going to make is around mobile and our chatbot called Ask CR. And then I think that the third piece of this is there's a whole lot of work for us to do when it comes to impact. So the federal government in particular is really pulling back when it comes to regulation. That could look like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau being gutted. It can look like significant changes to the FDA and how our food is being screened. And CR, I think look for CR in the next year or so to really step up and ensure that consumers are informed and that manufacturers and corporations are being held accountable and that the products that they're putting into the market are safe.
No, how inspiring. That's absolutely wonderful. And I can't imagine a better place to end a conversation, although I think that ending also brings about the potential for other beginnings in that I'd love to stay in touch with you and hear how it goes in the next year because it sounds like you've got a lot on your plate and a lot on your plate that will change the brand in many ways, but at the same time do some extraordinarily responsible things and keep up that legacy of being such a trusted brand and an advocate for consumers. So, congratulations for you to not only your role but expressing it all so well.
Thank you so much, Deborah. And we'll definitely stay in touch.
Thank you. The Internationalist focuses on the continual reinvention of marketing by highlighting inspirational marketers around the world and their ideas as they move the industry forward. Internationalist Marketing TV shares these perspectives through interviews and personal stories. Thanks so much for watching. If you find this kind of content helpful, please click like or subscribe. Again, thanks so much.